The morning sun barely touched the windows of Rosewood Café when Madison Torres felt the first sharp pain shoot through her lower back. 7 months pregnant, she shifted carefully in the corner booth, one hand supporting her belly, the other wrapped around a cup of herbal tea that had long gone cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 28 years old, Madison was supposed to be glowing with that pregnancy radiance everyone talks about. Instead, she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, about the baby coming in 2 months, about the husband who'd walked out when she told him she was keeping their child. She checked her phone for the third time in 10 minutes. Her interview wasn't for another hour, but she'd arrived early because the cafe was warm, because sitting here felt safer than walking the streets, because she needed every advantage she could get. This job at the medical office could change everything. Health insurance, steady income, a chance to build something stable before her daughter arrived. Madison's hand moved protectively over her belly as she felt another small kick. "Just hang tight, little one," she whispered. "Mama's trying to build us a better life." She had no idea that in exactly 17 minutes, her world would explode into chaos. She had no idea that a spoiled rich kid would see her as an easy target. And she definitely had no idea that 75 motorcycle engines were about to change everything. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments. Let's see how far this message about protecting the vulnerable can reach. Whether you're watching from a small town diner or a big city cafe, let me know you're here. Because what happened to Madison could happen to anyone. And what the bikers did next, it's something every community needs to see. Madison Torres had been fighting an uphill battle her entire life. Born in East Cleveland to a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, she'd learned early that the world didn't owe her anything. She'd worked her way through nursing school, graduated with honors, and landed a good job at Metropolitan General Hospital. Then she met David. Charming, successful, everything she thought she wanted. They moved in together, talked about marriage, about building a future. When Madison found out she was pregnant, she thought it was the missing piece falling into place. Instead, it was the moment everything fell apart. David didn't want children. Not now, maybe not ever. He gave her an ultimatum that wasn't really a choice, the baby or him. Madison chose her daughter without hesitation, and David walked out the same day, taking half their savings and leaving her with a lease she couldn't afford alone. The pregnancy had been difficult. Complications forced her to leave her hospital job earlier than planned. The unemployment benefits were running out. The apartment was gone. For the past month, she'd been staying at a women's shelter, applying for jobs, trying to rebuild from nothing. This morning's interview at Dr. Patterson's family practice was her best shot. The pay was decent, the hours were reasonable, and they'd hire someone who was pregnant. She'd borrowed a professional outfit from the shelter's clothing bank, practiced her answers in the mirror, and prayed harder than she had since she was a child. Madison wasn't asking for charity. She wasn't looking for handouts. She just wanted a chance to work, to provide, to be the mother her daughter deserved. She wanted what every person deserves: dignity, respect, and the opportunity to build something better. Sitting in that corner booth, sipping tea because it was cheaper than coffee, Madison Torres represented something powerful. She was every person who'd been knocked down but refused to stay down. Every single mother fighting against impossible odds. Every human being who understood that sometimes grace comes disguised as grit. She checked the time again. 45 minutes until the interview. Enough time to review her notes one more time, to practice her smile in the restroom mirror, to remind herself that she was worth hiring, worth respecting, worth believing in. Madison had no way of knowing that 3 blocks away, trouble was heading straight for her. The red Lamborghini Huracan announced Bryce Wellington's arrival before anyone saw his face. The engine note was sharp, aggressive, designed to turn heads and demand attention. At 21 years old, Bryce had never owned anything that wasn't the best money could buy. never worn anything that wasn't designer, never been told no by anyone who mattered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a B4. Lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His father, Harrison Wellington III, owned half the commercial real estate in the city. His mother, Vivian, sat on every charity board that counted for tax purposes rather than actual giving. Bryce was their only child, their golden boy, their future heir to an empire built on other people's sweat. He'd been expelled from 3 private schools before graduating, kicked out of 2 colleges before his father bought his way into a third. The DUI charges had disappeared. The assault allegations had been settled. The drug possession had been expunged. Money had a way of making problems disappear for the Wellington family. This morning, Bryce was still riding the high from last night's party at his parents' lake house. Cocaine, whiskey, and the kind of reckless behavior that only comes when you've never faced real consequences. His 3 passengers were equally intoxicated, equally privileged, equally convinced that the world existed for their entertainment. There was Trevor, whose pharmaceutical heiress mother funded his lifestyle of professional disappointment. Chad, the senator's son, who'd never held a real job but somehow had unlimited access to daddy's credit cards. And Marcus, the oil executive's heir, who treated women like accessories and poor people like obstacles. They'd been driving around since dawn, looking for something, anything, to extend the party. The coke was wearing off, the alcohol was making them mean, and they needed new entertainment. That's when Bryce spotted Rosewood Café. "Let's get coffee," he announced, not because he wanted coffee, but because he wanted an audience. Because he needed to perform, to prove to his friends that he was still the alpha, still the one willing to push boundaries that others wouldn't cross. They tumbled out of the Lamborghini like a pack of wild animals dressed in designer clothes. Bryce wore a $3,000 jacket like it was disposable. His watch cost more than most people's cars. His attitude cost more than both combined. The cafe went quiet when they walked in. It was that kind of place. Working-class neighborhood, blue-collar customers, people who earned their money rather than inherited it. The baristas behind the counter tensed immediately. They'd dealt with entitled college kids before, but this felt different. Meaner. Bryce surveyed the cafe like a predator choosing prey. His eyes swept past the construction workers, grabbing breakfast before their shift, past the elderly couple sharing a newspaper, past the college student hunched over textbooks, and then he saw her. Madison Torres, 7 months pregnant, sitting alone in the corner booth. Vulnerable. Isolated. Perfect. Bryce smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. He pulled out his phone, opened TikTok, and started recording. "Watch this," he whispered to his friends, already composing the caption in his head. Something about teaching entitled people their place. Something about showing the world how the real elite handled themselves. He had no idea that his definition of elite was about to be redefined by 75 men who understood what real strength looked like. Bryce approached Madison's table with the swagger of someone who'd never been taught humility. His phone was already recording, capturing every step, every smirk, every moment of what he thought would be his next viral hit. His friends spread out behind him, forming a semicircle that blocked any easy escape route. Madison looked up from her interview notes, immediately sensing the shift in energy. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, that protective gesture every expectant mother knows. She tried to smile politely, the way she'd been taught to handle difficult patients during her nursing training. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "is there something I can help you with?" Bryce laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. He gestured at her with his phone, making sure the camera caught her face, her condition, her obvious discomfort. "Yeah, actually, see me and my boys here. We're trying to enjoy our morning coffee, and we couldn't help but notice you taking up this whole booth by yourself." Madison's confusion was genuine. The booth was small, clearly designed for 1 or 2 people, and the cafe was only half full. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. There are plenty of other seats available." "That's not the point," Trevor chimed in, emboldened by Bryce's lead. The point is, some people think they're entitled to take up space that other people might want. Chad pulled out his own phone, adding a second camera angle to document what they thought would be their triumph. Yeah, like, maybe if you can't afford to actually order something decent, you shouldn't be camping out here. Madison's face flushed. She looked down at her herbal tea, suddenly ashamed of the economy choice, suddenly aware of how her borrowed outfit probably looked to these boys in their expensive clothes. I did order something. I'm just waiting for. Waiting for what? Marcus interrupted. Waiting for someone to take pity on you? Waiting for a handout? The cafe had gone completely silent now. Other customers were watching, some with obvious discomfort, others pulling out their own phones. The baristas behind the counter looked uncertain, caught between wanting to intervene and not knowing how to handle customers who were clearly wealthy, clearly connected, clearly trouble. Bryce leaned closer, his voice loud enough for his phone to pick up, clearly loud enough for everyone in the cafe to hear. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get up, waddle your way out of here, and find someplace more appropriate for people like you to hang out. Maybe the welfare office. Maybe the clinic. Somewhere you belong. Madison's hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from anger, from the injustice of being attacked for simply existing while pregnant, from the cruelty of boys who thought her condition made her weak, made her an easy target. I have as much right to be here as anyone else, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just sitting here quietly. Quietly? Bryce's voice rose to a near shout. You call taking up space with your welfare, baby, quiet? You call making decent people uncomfortable with your poverty quiet? That's when Madison tried to stand up, tried to remove herself from the situation before it escalated further. But Bryce wasn't done. He was performing now, high on the attention, drunk on the power of humiliating someone who couldn't fight back. As Madison struggled to get out of the booth, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and slow, Bryce made his move. He grabbed the large iced coffee from his friend Trevor's hand and, with his phone still recording, hurled it directly at Madison. The coffee hit her chest and exploded across her borrowed white blouse, the cold liquid soaking through to her skin, staining the professional outfit she'd hoped would help her get the job. Ice cubes scattered across the floor around her feet. The smell of coffee mixed with humiliation filled the air. Madison gasped, more from shock than pain, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. Coffee dripped from her hair, from her clothes, pooling on the vinyl seat she'd just vacated. The interview outfit was ruined. Her dignity felt equally destroyed. The cafe erupted in gasps and angry voices. Someone shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Another voice called out, "Call the police." But Bryce was laughing. His friends were laughing. And they were all recording, all capturing what they thought was the funniest thing they'd ever done. There, Bryce announced to his camera, to his friends, to the cafe full of tassas. Witnesses. Now maybe you'll think twice before taking up space where you don't belong. He had no idea that 75 motorcycles were already in motion, racing toward Rosewood Café. He had no idea that his little performance had just painted a target on his back that money couldn't erase. He had no idea that in less than 3 minutes, he was about to learn what real consequences looked like. Because Madison Torres wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. And the cavalry was about to arrive with thunder in their engines and justice in their hearts. 8 miles away, at Murphy's automotive shop, the Sacramento chapter of the Hells Angels had been gathering for their monthly charity ride. 75 bikers from across 3 counties, united by more than just their love of motorcycles. These men understood brotherhood, understood protection, understood that sometimes the world needed people willing to stand between predators and prey. The club president, a man everyone called Tank, stood 6'4", and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned respect the hard way. At 53, he'd been riding with the Angels for over 20 years, but before that, he'd been Sergeant First Class Michael Tankovich, United States Army Rangers, with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a chest full of medals he never talked about. Tank's phone buzzed with an incoming video message from his daughter Sarah. a nursing student who worked part-time at Rosewood Café. The message was short, urgent, and made Tank's blood run cold. "Dad, you need to see this. Rich kids attacking pregnant woman at my cafe. She needs help. Now." The video that followed showed everything. Bryce's approach, the verbal abuse, the coffee thrown at a pregnant woman who'd done nothing except exist in a space these boys thought they owned. Tank watched it once, then again, his jaw tightening with each replay. He didn't need to call a meeting, didn't need to take a vote. Tank raised his fist. In the air, the universal signal, and 75 conversations stopped immediately. 75 men turned their attention to their president, reading his expression, understanding instinctively that something had shifted. "Brothers," Tank's voice carried across the parking lot without amplification, trained by years of commanding soldiers and leading men. "We got a situation. Pregnant woman being attacked by some punk rich kids at Rosewood Café. They threw coffee on her, humiliated her, made her a target for their entertainment. The response was immediate and visceral. Engines started without orders. Kickstands went up. These men had mothers, sisters, daughters, wives. They understood that attacking a pregnant woman was beyond cowardice. It was an assault on everything they'd sworn to protect. But Tank held up his hand, stopping the immediate exodus. Because the Hell's Angels weren't vigilantes. They were disciplined. They were strategic. And they understood that justice, served hot, often burned everything around it. "We do this right," Tank continued, his voice cutting through the rumble of idling engines. "No violence unless they escalate. No property damage. No criminal charges that put the club at risk. We go in numbers, we make our point, and we make sure this never happens again." Questions? There were no questions. There never were when Tank spoke. These men had followed him through situations far more complex than confronting spoiled rich kids. They trusted his judgment, trusted his leadership, trusted that he'd find the right balance between justice and restraint. The formation that pulled out of Murphy's parking lot was military in its precision. Tank led, flanked by his road captains Bear and Diesel. Behind them rode the sergeant-at-arms and his enforcers. Then came the rest of the chapter, organized by seniority, by experience, by the unspoken hierarchy that kept 75 alpha males functioning as a single unit. They weren't criminals, heading to commit crimes. They were protectors heading to protect. They weren't outlaws looking for trouble. They were fathers, grandfathers, veterans, working men who understood that evil flourished when good people did nothing. The ride to Rosewood Café took exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Long enough for word to spread through the police scanner frequencies that Sarah monitored on her phone. Long enough for her to warn the cafe staff what was coming. Long enough for Madison Torres to understand that help was on the way, though she had no idea what form that help would take. As they approached the cafe, Tank could see the red Lamborghini parked arrogantly across 3 spaces, could see the crowd of people gathered outside with phones raised, could hear the laughter still coming from inside. The situation was ongoing. The humiliation was continuing. The target was still under attack. Tank's hand signal was barely visible, but every rider behind him saw it. The formation spread out, surrounding the building, blocking every exit, creating a wall of chrome and leather and controlled fury that transformed the entire block. 75 Harley-Davidson motorcycles don't whisper. They announce. They declare. They make promises about what comes next that can't be misunderstood. The sound of their arrival was like thunder, like an earthquake, like the voice of justice speaking in a language that even spoiled rich kids could understand. Inside the cafe, Bryce was still performing for his cameras, still laughing at Madison's humiliation, still completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. He had no idea that outside, 75 men were dismounting their bikes with the precision of a military operation. He had no idea that Tank was already walking toward the door, his expression calm, his purpose clear, his patience at an end. He had no idea that everything he thought he knew about power, about privilege, about consequences was about to be redefined by men who understood what real strength looked like. The cafe door opened with a gentle chime that seemed impossibly innocent given what was about to happen. Tank stepped inside, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Tank stepped through the cafe door with the measured pace of a man who'd walked into hostile territory before and understood the value of controlled intimidation. He was alone for exactly 7 seconds, long enough to survey the scene, to locate the threat, to position himself strategically. Then Bear entered behind him, then Diesel, then a steady stream of leather-clad bikers who filled the cafe like water finding its level. 75 men didn't all fit inside Rosewood Café. They didn't need to. 20 entered and spread out with military precision, creating a wall between the rich kids and any possible escape route. The remaining 55 stationed themselves outside, visible through every window their presence felt, even when they couldn't be seen. Bryce's laughter died in his throat. The phone in his hand suddenly felt like a toy, like a child's plaything in the face of something far more serious than he'd ever encountered. His friends, who'd been so bold just moments earlier, now pressed back against the far wall, their expensive clothes and confident attitudes offering no protection against the reality of consequences. Tank's eyes found Madison first. She was still standing by her booth, coffee staining her white blouse, her hands protectively cradling her belly, her face a mixture of humiliation and hope. He saw everything he needed to see in her expression: the vulnerability, the dignity, the strength it had taken to endure what these boys had done to her. Then his attention turned to Bryce. The boy, because that's what he was, really, just a boy who'd never grown up, was trying to maintain his bravado, but his hands were shaking. The phone continued recording, but now it was capturing his fear rather than his triumph. Tank's voice, when he spoke, was quiet, conversational, more terrifying than any shout could have been. "Son, I need you to put that phone down." It wasn't a request. Bryce's hand trembled as he lowered the device, the red recording light finally going dark. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant rumble of motorcycles outside and the sound of Madison's quiet crying. Tank took a step closer, his movement deliberate and careful. He understood intimidation as a tool, but he also understood restraint as a virtue. "What's your name?" "Bryce," the boy stammered, then seemed to remember who he was supposed to be. "Bryce Wellington. My father is Harrison Wellington. He owns—" "I know who your father is," Tank interrupted, his voice still calm. "Question is, does your father know who you are? Does he know what kind of man he raised?" Tank gestured toward Madison without taking his eyes off Bryce. "This woman is 7 months pregnant. She's sitting quietly, minding her own business, preparing for a job interview, and you decided to attack her. For entertainment." The word attack hung in the air like smoke. Legal, specific, undeniable. Because that's what it was. Assault and battery against a pregnant woman, captured on multiple phones, witnessed by dozens of people. Bear stepped forward then, his massive frame adding weight to Tank's words. At 6'6" and 300 pounds, Bear had the kind of presence that made smart people reconsider their life choices. But his voice, when he spoke, was as controlled as Tank's. "Kid, you just committed assault and battery against a pregnant woman, in front of witnesses, while recording yourself. That's not privilege talking anymore. That's felony charges." The color drained from Bryce's face. For the first time in his life, money felt inadequate to solve the problem he'd created. His friends were already backing away, already calculating how to distance themselves from the situation, already preparing to throw him under the bus if necessary. Tank reached into his jacket pocket, and every person in the cafe held their breath. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a business card. Clean, professional, expensive paper. "That's my lawyer's card," Tank said, offering it to Madison. "Marcus Chen. He specializes in assault cases. He'll take your case pro bono, and he'll make sure this boy faces every consequence the law allows." Madison took the card with trembling fingers, her eyes wide with surprise. She'd expected violence, expected these bikers to handle the situation the way movies taught her to expect. Instead, she was being offered legal representation by men who understood that real justice came through proper channels. Diesel, the club's treasurer, stepped forward with his own offering. A thick envelope, neatly sealed. "That's $5,000, he said simply. "For new interview clothes, medical checkup to make sure. The baby's okay. Whatever you need." Madison stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. "I can't accept." "Yes, you can," Tank said firmly. "Because accepting help when you need it isn't charity. It's community, and you're part of our community now." Tank turned back to Bryce, who was watching this display of generosity with mounting horror. The rich kid was beginning to understand that money wasn't the only currency that mattered, that respect and dignity couldn't be purchased at any price. "Now, about you," Tank continued, his attention fully focused on Bryce again. "You got choices to make. Choice 1. We call the police right now. You get arrested for assault and battery. Your little video gets introduced as evidence. You face trial, conviction, and a criminal record that follows you forever." Bryce opened his mouth to object, probably to mention his father's lawyers, his family's influence, their ability to make problems disappear. Tank held up a hand, stopping him. "Choice 2. You. Make this right. Real consequences, real accountability, real change. Not your daddy's money fixing your mistakes. You fixing your own mistakes with your own effort." The cafe was dead silent. Even the kitchen had stopped clanking. Every person present understood they were witnessing something rare. Justice being offered rather than imposed, redemption being made available to someone who didn't deserve it but desperately needed it. Tank laid out the terms with the precision of a contract negotiation. 6 months community service at the downtown women's shelter, every day after your college classes. You'll help serve meals, clean facilities, listen to stories of women who've been where Madison is now. You'll learn what real struggle looks like. Bryce's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. 6 months of manual labor, of being around poor people, of actual work. It was more accountability than he'd faced in his entire privileged life. "That's not all," Bear added. "You'll also write a public apology, not some lawyer-crafted statement. Your own words, your own handwriting, explaining what you did and why it was wrong. It gets posted online, gets sent to every news outlet in the city. Your face, your name, your shame." The social consequences hit Bryce harder than the legal ones might have. His reputation, his social media presence, his standing among his wealthy peers, all of it would be destroyed by a public admission of guilt. Tank stepped closer, close enough that Bryce could smell leather and motor oil, close enough to feel the weight of real consequence bearing down on him. And the most important part, you apologize to Madison. Right now, eye to eye, human to human. You tell her exactly what you did wrong and why you'll never do it again. The moment stretched out like taffy. Bryce looked around the cafe, seeing his options clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. 75 bikers surrounding him. Multiple phones recording, witnesses everywhere. Legal consequences looming. Social destruction guaranteed. But also, surprisingly, a path forward. A chance to make amends rather than just face punishment. An opportunity to become something better than what he'd been, rather than simply being destroyed for what he'd done. Bryce Wellington, heir to millions, privileged beyond measure, spoiled beyond repair, did something that shocked everyone present, including himself. He walked over to Madison Torres and got down on his knees. The sight of Bryce Wellington on his knees in front of a pregnant woman he'd just humiliated was so unprecedented that several people in the cafe gasped audibly. His expensive jeans pressed against the coffee-stained floor, his designer jacket wrinkled from the awkward position, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead as he looked up at Madison. For a moment, nobody moved. The bikers watched with cautious approval. The cafe customers held their phones higher, documenting what felt like a historic moment. Madison stared down at this boy who'd just destroyed her interview outfit and was now kneeling at her feet like a penitent seeking absolution. When Bryce spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the cafe, every word carried clearly. I'm sorry. 2 words, simple and inadequate, but spoken with a sincerity that surprised everyone, including Bryce himself. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. There's no excuse. No reason. I attacked you because I thought it would be funny, because I thought you couldn't fight back, because I've never had to face consequences for anything in my life. Tears were running freely down his face now, cutting tracks through the carefully maintained facade he'd worn since childhood. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And I'm going to spend every day for the next 6 months trying to understand why I thought it was okay to hurt someone who was just trying to live her life. Madison stared down at him, her own eyes wet with tears. Part of her wanted to accept the apology, to forgive and move forward. Part of her wanted to kick him while he was down, to make him feel a fraction of the humiliation she'd endured. But mostly, she just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of struggling. Tired of being seen as less than human by people who'd never faced real hardship. Stand up, she said quietly. Please, just stand up. Bryce rose unsteadily to his feet, his face red with shame and tears. Madison looked at him for a long moment. This privileged boy who'd just learned that actions had consequences, that other people's pain was real and meaningful and important. Do you mean it? She asked. Do you really understand what you did? Or are you just saying what you think these men want to hear? It was the most important question anyone had ever asked Bryce Wellington. The answer would determine not just his immediate fate, but the kind of person he would become going forward. Would he choose the easy path of performance and manipulation, or the harder path of genuine accountability and growth? Bryce looked around the cafe, at the bikers watching him with barely concealed skepticism, at his former friends who'd abandoned him the moment real consequences appeared, at the regular customers who'd witnessed his cruelty and were now judging his sincerity. Then he looked back at Madison, at this woman he'd tried to destroy for his own amusement, and made a choice that surprised everyone. I don't understand yet, he said honestly. But I want to. I need to. Because the person who threw coffee at you, who thought your pregnancy made you weak, who attacked you for entertainment, that person is everything wrong with the world. And I don't want to be that person anymore. Tank nodded slowly. It wasn't the perfect answer, wasn't the complete transformation that movies taught people to expect. But it was honest. It was a beginning. And sometimes, a genuine beginning was more valuable than a false ending. 6 months, Tank repeated. Women's shelter. Every day. And if you miss even one day, if you show up late, if you treat anyone there with anything less than complete respect, we'll be back. And next time, we won't be offering choices. Bryce nodded frantically. I understand. I'll be there. Every day. I promise. Tank turned to Madison, his expression softening. Ma'am, what time is your interview? Madison checked her phone, her heart sinking. 20 minutes. But I can't go like this. She gestured at her coffee-stained blouse, at the ruined professional outfit she'd borrowed from the shelter. Sarah, Tank's daughter, stepped forward from behind the counter. She'd been watching the entire confrontation with a mixture of pride and amazement. Mom's boutique is 2 blocks away. She's about your size. We can get you something professional in 10 minutes. Bear pulled out his wallet and handed Madison a credit card. Buy whatever you need. Interview outfit, backup clothes, whatever makes you feel confident. Money's no object. Madison stared at the card, overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers who owed her nothing but had chosen to stand with her anyway. I can't repay this. You don't need to, Diesel said firmly. You just need to nail that interview and build a good life for your daughter. That's payment enough. As the bikers began filing out of the cafe, their point made and their justice served, Tank paused beside Bryce one final time. Kid, you got a chance here that most people never get. A chance to become someone better than who you were yesterday. Don't waste it. The last thing Tank did before leaving was hand Madison a different business card. Not a lawyer this time, but something else entirely. My wife runs a support group for single mothers. Every Thursday evening at Street Marks Community Center. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to figure it out by yourself. As the motorcycles roared to life outside and began pulling away from Rosewood Café. Madison stood holding two business cards, a credit card, an envelope of cash, and something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Bryce remained behind, forgotten by his friends, abandoned by his enablers, left to contemplate the wreckage of his old life and the uncertain promise of something better. He pulled out his phone, not to record or post, but to delete his social media accounts, to start the process of becoming someone worth respecting. The cafe slowly returned to normal, but everyone present understood they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Not just justice being served, but mercy being offered. Not just consequences being imposed, but redemption being made possible. Madison made her interview with 2 minutes to spare, wearing a professional outfit that fit perfectly and cost more than she'd spent on clothes in the past year. She got the job. She also got something else. A community of people who'd proven that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Madison Torres gave birth to a healthy daughter named Hope. At the baby shower, organized by Tank's wife and attended by dozens of bikers' families, Bryce Wellington was there, not as a guest, but as someone serving food, cleaning tables, and listening to stories of women who'd overcome incredible odds to build better lives. He completed his community service at the women's shelter, but he hadn't stopped volunteering. He'd changed his major from business to social work. He'd moved out of his parents' mansion and into a modest apartment near downtown, where he could walk to the shelter each day. The public apology he'd written had gone viral, but not in the way he'd expected. Instead of becoming a cautionary tale about privilege gone wrong, it had become an inspiring story about accountability leading to growth. He received hundreds of messages from other young people who'd recognized themselves in his story and wanted to do better. Bryce's relationship with his parents had been strained at first. They tried to use money and influence to make his problem disappear. Couldn't understand why he was choosing a difficult path when an easy one was available. But as months passed and they saw genuine change in their son, they began to support his transformation, even if they didn't fully understand it. The Hells Angels had gained something too. The video of their intervention at Rosewood Café had shown the world a different image of motorcycle clubs. Not outlaws or criminals, but protectors and community members. Recruitment inquiries increased, but more importantly, the quality of men seeking to join had improved dramatically. Tank still led charity rides every month, but now they often included stops at the women's shelter, at community centers, at places where people needed to see that help could come from unexpected sources. The club's motto, respect, protect, serve, had taken on new meaning in the aftermath of Madison's story. But the most important change was in Madison herself. The job at Dr. Patterson's office had led to other opportunities. She completed her nursing degree while working part-time, supported by a community that had rallied around her and her daughter. She'd moved into a small house near the shelter, where she volunteered when time permitted. Hope Torres, named for the emotion her mother had rediscovered that day in the cafe, grew up surrounded by an extended family of bikers, nurses, shelter workers, and community members who understood that protecting children was everyone's responsibility. On Hope's first birthday, held in the same community center, where her mother had found support, Tank gave a speech that captured what they'd all learned from Madison's story. Sometimes, he said, his voice carrying across a room filled with leather and lace, with motorcycles and minivans, with people from every walk of life, united by a common understanding. Sometimes the world tries to tell us that some people matter more than others, that money makes you important, that power makes you right, that being vulnerable makes you a target. He looked around the room, making eye contact with Madison, with Bryce, with his daughter Sarah, with dozens of faces that had been changed by one morning's choice to stand up rather than stand by. But what happened at Rosewood Café proved something different. It proved that when good people refuse to be bystanders, when they choose to protect rather than ignore, when they offer mercy alongside justice, that's when real change becomes possible. That's when communities become families. That's when hope gets born. Hope Torres took her first steps that day, wobbling between her mother and Tank, supported by hands that had chosen protection over indifference, accountability over enabling, community over isolation. The story that began with cruelty in a cafe had become something else entirely. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected people become family, that sometimes consequences can lead to redemption, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. But they only win when they show up, when they refuse to be bystanders, when they choose to act rather than ignore. The rumble of 75 motorcycles had announced more than just the arrival of justice that morning. It had announced the beginning of something better, something stronger, something that proved every day that no one has to face their battles alone. Madison Torres learned that lesson in a coffee shop, surrounded by strangers who became family. Bryce Wellington learned it in 6 months of service that became a lifetime of purpose. Tank and his brothers learned it by choosing mercy over vengeance, community over isolation, hope over despair. And Hope Torres would grow up knowing it from the very beginning. That real strength protects the vulnerable, that real power lifts others up, and that real family is chosen, not inherited. The engines had gone quiet, but the echo of their message continued to reverberate through every life they'd touched, every heart they'd changed, every future they'd made possible. Sometimes, justice really does ride a Harley. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.